which has been put forward recently.
Who'd like to start? Joe?
Really interesting. In January, I was in Queensland when Telstra lines went down during, was it flooding? Can't remember. And I was flying home, and one of the things that happened was with no telephone lines, there was nothing. And I was in Cairns, and on one side of things, you know, everything was so peaceful while I waited 6 hours to check into my flight, and then another couple of hours to board my plane because I couldn't contact anybody, so I actually read a novel. But one of the really interesting things was the reliance that I observed, I guess, is the reliance that we have on the telecommunications, not only for how we communicate with people, but how we do business. The number of people that were stuck in Cairns Airport without money and not able to make purchases because we use EFT to do those transactions was astounding. It really blew me away because people just don't use cash anymore. And I think that from a regional perspective, one of the challenges is that so much of our population lives on the coast, has access already to fast and reasonably priced internet communications that enable the way that they live, and they maybe take it for granted. But one of the things is that in regional Australia we don't have that same privilege, and it's even more important to us in terms of the way that we that access, I think, is even more important to us in the way that we operate, and with what's coming in terms of the future, and how we need to operate as businesses in terms of manufacturing being declining, and where the future of business is for Australia and for regional Australia in particular. And I think some of the opportunities in around things like telecommuting and working in a little place like Brewarrina, for example, where there's 17% unemployment, we have to start thinking how we can use the internet to actually enable, and the infrastructure to enable a change in those communities that actually sees an economic change for Australia as well.
Thanks, Megan.
Can I make a point? I would sum up an answer to your question with one word: vision. And it's about having a vision for the future and building the infrastructure that allows that vision to be fulfilled. If you think about the Sydney Harbour Bridge, when they built it in the 30s, late 20s, early 30s, it was empty. But today it's completely full. It's at its capacity. But someone had the vision to say, let's put 6 lanes in a train and a tram. I mean, that kind of vision, I feel, is what we have with the NBN. If we do it properly, if we do, as Joe said, the Rolls-Royce version, then it's I'll be able to say to my kids, we built infrastructure that really has serviced the country for 50 years. So it is about having that vision, and I think we've become kind of infrastructure adverse for some reason. When you look at some of the big projects that have happened in the past, the Snowy Mountain scheme, we haven't done it really, I think, anything since then. So I'd like to see vision come back into the equation. Yep. Peter.
I agree with you. I think that some of the measures that have been used in the community to put a value on what the investment is going to deliver could be better measured perhaps in the context of quality of life. And I think it's okay and it's exciting that we are going to have huge entertainment capability as part of this. But I think once the dust settles and people start looking, it's a little bit like ATM machines. I mean, over the last 2 decades, that's changed my quality of life tremendously. I hated waiting in bank queues. Now it's just a part of the way we live, and I think that's what will happen. So once the dust settles and people have downloaded gigabits of media, we'll get onto the more important things, and that's where places like Dubbo could do enormously well, because of the very fact that we're tackling the tyranny of distance. We're allowing families to stay better connected, and I think if if we could define the benefits in terms of quality of life, people would ask some serious questions about where you need to live in Australia in order to be happy.
Just going to the second part of your question, it's one of the number one questions we get about if there are people in any given community really excited about impending changes to the digital economy, how do we actually invigorate our local community? Brisbane City Council recently conducted a citywide audit of everything to do with digital and online for SMEs. And the result of that was a really, really amazing comprehensive set of data. But importantly, out of that audit, they chose 20 leading enterprises, some of them multinationals and other of them 2 or 3 man operations, that they've chosen as mentors to be part of an online digital SME network in Brisbane City. And as a result, that innovation and that excitement is being communicated right through the SME network of Brisbane City Council. So, obviously a different scale here in Dubbo City, but if the chamber or the local council were interested in embarking on something obviously at a smaller scale, I think that model could be replicated anywhere to really invigorate and get those businesses, those 60% of SMEs who don't have any online presence, excited or to open their eyes about who to speak to. How do I get a website built? How do I teleconference? What does VoIP mean? Those simple things that you feel more comfortable asking the shop owner next door than, one of us up here. So there are some models that exist out there, and if you wanted to talk afterwards, I'd be happy to put you in contact with those people at Brisbane City.
Very, very quickly, Michael, to answer your question, what do we talk about? The need for speed I'll talk about tomorrow in my talk, and it's clouded the debate. There's 2 important things about the NBN which link to Peter's comment about infrastructure. That is equity and ubiquity. So the NBN, the model that's been rolled out, why it's got to be rolled out by government is because it's got to go absolutely everywhere. Everywhere, and it's got to be at the same price for everyone. So ubiquity and equity of access are the 2 very important things for the NBN. The speed debate is a whole other issue, and I can talk about it for hours, and I have and I will. But if you want to promote it, basically, most disadvantaged people in Australia are going to get access to it, and it's going to be at the same price.
Yes, down here.
James Davis from Junee Shire Council. In the early days when the NBN were talking about the rollout, I was at a session and I thought I heard it right, and that was this, that the government is actually going to recoup its costs over time from the rollout of this $50 billion exercise. And yet the debate seems not to highlight that anymore, and it's a race to the bottom in a sense. I'm just wondering, because I could quite happily defend that at a barbecue or when we're out in public, that this investment was actually a payback proposition. But that's not really what you're hearing in the public, and I'm wondering if anything's changed and why, if so, why it's not being aired.
There are some really big communication challenges that we face with the NBN. Some of them are technical, and some of them are financial. And I wouldn't call it a misunderstanding. It's potentially that us or the government haven't communicated effectively that we're in fact not robbing Peter to give to Paul. The Dubbo base hospital is not being upgraded to enable the NBN to happen. That's not the case. The fundamental financials are that the government is loaning money to us to build infrastructure that will generate revenue and pay for itself, that we can borrow against to continue the build. So it's not the government spending $37.4 billion and getting nothing back. The infrastructure pays for itself. I think it's laid out in the ZAIR, but as I said, us and the department are continuing to learn about how to communicate all those different aspects of the NBN, and it's a challenge.
building on what Joe's saying, so my comments are prefaced from the department and that the department implements the government's policy of the day. The return on investment that you're talking about is still factual, still in the public domain, that the government's expenditure or the company's expenditure on rolling out the NBN, they will achieve a return that's in excess of the financing costs or the long-term bond rate. I think why isn't that being hit home? I can't really comment on that. I mean, that's for commentators. But I suppose one point I'll point out, I've been doing this, I joined the department at the time just after the previous Prime Minister's announcement with Senator Conroy that the government were going to build its own NBN, is that I remember coming over and it was a very topic, why are they doing it? This is, it's the government intervening in market economy and rah. All that messaging, it's going to cost 43 billion and now it's 37.4. And well, the messaging that we're hearing now is from communities is why can't we have it tomorrow? It's not whether it's good or bad. It's why can't we have it tomorrow? And an infrastructure project as large as that is, where you're putting fibre down every street into every premise to 93%. Is a huge undertaking over 10 years, but the key thing we're hearing is why can't we have it tomorrow? So that's things that have changed in the last 3 or 4 years. Why they don't focus on the rate of return, I don't know. It's out in the public domain. Maybe the number crunchers have gone through it and realised it stacks up. So move on to the next issue.
Got a question up there? Yeah.
Wayne Coomber. The question I suppose I've got is it's likely, at the next election things will change. How do you see that affecting the cost of business insofar as businesses will likely have to deal with a patchwork of different technologies as opposed to, a ubiquitous fibre rollout, where if you're doing business nationally, for example, you may have office somewhere where there's HFC. You may have to deal with fibre speeds, you may have to deal with copper speeds. It seems to me to add a very different sort of structure to the whole thing, and obviously a different cost structure to it as well. What's the thoughts on that?
Don't all look at me.
Look, I'd quote Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen, we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. If we get to it.
Yes. It's a good question.
It's Chris Ryan here. I'm a local technician. A lot of small businesses here have tried to get on the internet, and at the moment eBay seems to be the way to go. They've had some very bad experiences, eBay being controlled from outside the country. What are your thoughts about the control of some of it, like Facebook and eBay's that are not controlled within Australia? And is there a better way to be able to start business on the internet?
I think one of the other sides to the debate